Today we're going to be doing some Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to build a castle. So before we get into it, this is primarily, we're talking fighter, but obviously there are some classes that develop the need to have a place of residence. Magic users, illusionists at about 10th level, thieves and so on, assassins setting up their lairs, all of that. And monks with their monasteries, clerics and their temples. And with that, they have similar levels of construction and similar ideas on how they develop the area and what they do. But for the most part, today we're looking through the eyes of the fighter. So your fighter, or the character's fighter, gets to 9th level. And the very next thing they say is, I want to set up a freehold stronghold and build a castle of some description. And of course, they turn to you as the DM, and you now have to figure out exactly what it is that needs to be done. So what we're hoping to look at today is a few pieces of information, gathered some ideas, put it together, go through some of the levels of construction, and we'll see how we can put this together with the players as well as the DM, because there's a few things that need to happen in order to let the player have their dream castle. And the first thing is, of course, location, location, location. For the most part, I'm assuming that we're in Greyhawk because that's my setting. I love Greyhawk. Greyhawk's a great setting. And if we get in close enough, you'll see that there's all these little hexes everywhere. The traditional hex crawl, as we hear people call them. Each hex is 30 miles from edge to edge. So the furthest points to the opposite point, you're looking at 30 miles. Meaning that if you're in the middle of the hex, it's 15 to the edge or to the corner of the sides, and then of course the 30 of the next hex. So for that fighter that needs to clear out a 20 to 50 zone, realistically what we're looking at is the initial hex and most likely the one hex around that area. So as we sort of pan across the map, whilst there are a lot of hexes, it's not as simple as just planting your flag and deciding I am going to set up here and let everything go. They need the space, they need to have the space either provided to them by the local lord, by the king, by the emperor, by whatever. And that may be in an adventure in itself. Or they may actually literally be badlands and they can just do that. Walk in and just say, right, I'm hoisting my flag in the middle of the pomage and there's nothing anyone's going to do about it. There's a nice spot. But you have to clear that zone and keep it protected. And this is one of those areas where it might be nice to talk to friendly kingdoms and work out ways of having a piece of their land. They definitely don't want to upset you because you're a 9th, 10th level fighter with half a dozen companions that are of equal level that are probably slightly, psychotic and manic. Meaning that you never know what a player character is going to do. And these kings know that, so they have to be very careful when they deal with players as well. We won't go into it too much here, but this is literally the hex crawl. If you wanted to say, right, I'm setting up in Bissell, and it's going to be along here, you're taking this corner right there. Then you might have to do some serious hex crawling, clear out the zone, take out a couple of dungeons, take out a couple of local warlords that are trying to do similar sort of thing, and so on. And then once you've got that sorted, then you're able to say, right, this is mine, and I've claimed it by right of, well, being 9th level. Now there are only a couple of races that will make it to that 9th, 10th level. Half-orcs will always get to 10th level because there's no minimum requirement. They will just make it to 10th level fighter. Humans, of course, can always make it to an unlimited level. And dwarves with 18 strength can make it to 9th level, which is also the time that's the level required for starting this endeavor. So simply put, they're the only races that actually get to make this, and that might shape how the adventures progress. But basically, humans make castles. That's the general way to go. A wizard has a wizard's tower, and an elf wizard can make a wizard's tower, but no elf fighter can ever make a castle in the same way that a 9th level does. You can always make a castle, but when a fighter makes a castle, they automatically attract a body of men-at-arms, and they also collect tithes. So you immediately get this massive following of people who are after security and safety, so they follow the fighter, and that's what shows up. If you're just a regular 8th level and you create a castle, you don't get the full body of personnel that just show up to help defend your wares. So the first thing you might be thinking of as a DM is, well, let's see what Gary says. So you open up the DM's guide, and what you're confronted with is a chart of gold pieces and some sort of bizarre descriptions, one line, very simple, of what some of these items are. So what I want to do next is just run through some of this, and you will have to forgive my artistry, but it's handy to show people sometimes, just to sort of see what these items look like, and you have an idea of, when you start to look at other castles, you'll recognize the pieces that are out there and what they're attached to. If you had a familiarity with some of these things from being, a student of medieval history or just fascinated with castles, you may actually know what all of these are, and you may not have to worry about it. But for a great many people, they don't have that sort of knowledge, and you have to learn and figure out what each item is and what benefit they have, and is it worth it. So with that, let's get on to having a look at some of these elements. So what I've tried to do is draw an idea of what they look like from the top as well as from the front, sometimes just to sort of try and show what they're describing. And the first one up that's worth it is the Barbican. So the Barbican is a building structure that's at the front before you even get to the castle. Sometimes, eventually, they do connect up and you do have the walls that bring it through, and that creates an outer courtyard, an inner courtyard, and so on. But for the most part, the Barbican sort of sits much more towards the front. And you'll have the option of either having it flat out open, like some Barbicans are, when you if you've done any tours through Europe and seen some of the castles or studied castles, or you're a mason, I don't know, you know that not all of them are gated and doored, but by default they have nothing on the tops and they have no door by default. So this is a way of an initial level of sort of defense, but more of a, you are entering the castle grounds with the circle towers and the construct inside there. The next thing we're going to have a look at is what's called a bartizan. So a bartizan hangs off a wall. So it's stone, and sometimes you'll see them and they've got like little peak spires on the top. And when you see on the castle that they just suddenly have a structure that generally comes in from about halfway up the length of the wall and goes to the top or just a little bit above the top of where the wall sits. And then you can either do your partitioning at the top, which we'll talk about in a second, parapets and such, or you can leave it flat and have the windows and arrow slits along the inside there. Speaking of protrusions, the machicolations. And these are a construct that sits outside the top of towers and walls, but they've got holes in them. So they cling to the edge, and the defenders are able to pour things or drop stones or fire arrows directly below underneath. And so they've got like a little bit of a hole. So that's an example of a machicolation on a tower. So along the tops of all of these, often when you purchase a tower and a wall, they don't come with any parapets or merlons, which is what we're looking at here. So what you're also able to do is put a wooden partition inside between the merlons. So the merlons are the actual bumpy bits on the top of the castle that the archers stand between. And you can have wooden doors that flip open, which is called an embrasure, that allow the archers to fire, especially good for heavy crossbows, fire, lower it, then open it up again and fire it and lower it, and for protection. What you'll see with the embrasures as an example is with cannons, usually, like on the sides of black powder ships, how they have those flappy doory things. Yep, that's an embrasure. So that's an example of one. Then the flaps open or drop, and then the archers do what they do, and then they fire it off. So a merlon is this, the actual stonework atop of the buildings, and they stand quite high up to give lots of defense for the archers. 4 feet wide and an extra 5 feet there. Behind the merlon you have the parapet. So you have the wall that finishes, then you have the parapet, which is a 3 foot high, and then you have the actual merlon. So this here is where the parapet ends, and then you have the merlon on top of the parapet. And the parapet's about 3 feet high, so that way you've just got something. If you just want parapets around the edges, then that's a 3 foot high wall barrier. It's good enough to defend yourself with. Then where we head to from there is a thing called a bastion. And a bastion is where you've got a roundish protrusion that comes out of a length of wall, and it creates a spot for either platforms or something for many soldiers to use to run past each other without bumping into each other. As well as, once you put a parapet and the merlons on, it's a defensible position with more of an arc of fire, because you've got a bit more of an angle around from there. The other thing that's in this list is the pilaster. And the pilaster is, if you've ever tried to make something, you've made pilasters. Probably not realised, just to make a stable wall, when you especially done modelling and you've got a straight section, then you add a protrusion for balance and support. That's what the pilaster does. All of the walls and building heights and everything else are all set at a level where you don't need any additional height. But if you wanted something larger or longer or further, then you need to support it with something to be able to give you that extra oomph. And that's where these come in. So they'll be on the inside of the wall. And then you'll have, so this might be a 50-foot wall instead of the 30-foot wall, to be able to provide the strength to keep the wall supported. Now there are these other things called hoardings that stick out from the front of the walls, and that the DM's guide gives you what they're usually temporary structures. Usually when you know that you're about to besiege, you might quickly construct a few of these or have a whole row of them. And so that's a wooden construct with essentially like a motor hole to be able to drop things underneath, and you'll be able to have an archer standing in here to be able to get into there. So it'll exist so they can crawl over there and into the hoarding for some additional fire support. Again, in the initial one is wood, so you'll have all of the instructions on construction for that. Then ultimately, at last, we have the gatehouse. So the gatehouse is what's the entrance to the actual keep. So that would be the stone building that's been made to house the hero or the villain. And there's a gatehouse at the front. So the gatehouse has a portcullis as well as double doors. Generally they don't have anything on the back, but they will hidden here. And you'll have little ramparts at the front to be able to protect just some additional layering of support. So if you do get an attack, you've got some level of protection just at the front here. So that's the gatehouse, the hoardings, pilaster, maculations, the barbican, the bartizan, an explanation of the merlin, what an embrasure is, and how a parapet works. So if we head over to the expert hirelings tables, you'll see engineer architect. And we definitely need to have an engineer and architect whenever we're planning on building anything, especially something of this scale. So with that, you're paying for that person specifically, and the costs of the actual product may also include getting the stone nearby and so on. If there isn't the right material, then you may need to get it in from further, which may alter the cost. That's very specific, and let's face it, when they made Stonehenge, the DM hand waved, where did the stone come from? And when they were making the pyramids, the DM hand waved construction, and we have the pyramids. So it's okay to hand wave some things for the simplicity of just saying, okay, that's actually included. How the stone gets here is not the player's concern. They're just paying for a contractor, and then the contractor runs everything else from there and work it out from that way. So, but you do need to pay for the engineer architect, and you've got ongoing costs as well as monthly costs and so on. So that is really important to keep that in line. The architect, mason, and so on, they'll all be sorted out. They're pretty easy in terms of hirelings and setting up. Once you've got your expert hireling, which has to be collected by the player character, pretty much the standard hirelings can be run by you hire the engineer architect who has his own set of masons, and we're off. That's just it. You don't need to hand pick every single worker. And this is also an instance where, from a gaming point of view, might be a few spies in there. You never know, but you know, it's always worthwhile just to have someone keep an eye on how things are being constructed. In terms of construction time, you can see that it takes a while to actually make something. So you need to have all of the money aside. You may be able to pay for it as you go, some up front, some in the middle, some at completion. We know how these things go. So unlike a regular contractor, the cost that we work out is going to be the cost of the whole production. We're not going to have any add-ons. But everything, when you see something like, for example, the castle at Edinburgh, that's generations of castle building. So you might start with something and then add a wall later and add more walls later and so on. But that's may or may not be something the players want to think about. But in effect, what you're looking at is anywhere between one year for a small castle, which will just be a keep, going up to 3 years plus 2 to 8 months for a medium castle with extras. So it'd be somewhere in that, around there, between those ranges is what we're looking at. And the player's got to find, obviously, a place to live, and they can do their thing. Then once it's constructed, they have a base of operations. And once you have your base of operations, you no longer have to pay for training. Once you have your base of operations, you have people that suddenly show up on your doorstep to say they want to work for you, and you suddenly start to collect a tithe from all the local people. For the hundreds of employees that need to be here to build and collect and create all of this, then they need homes, and they need to be fed, and they need everything else. So it becomes a small town, becomes a small settlement. Then as you need to do more things, well, things happen. So then you need to protect these people, you need to have an army or forces, and suddenly we're playing a completely different game. Like all things Gygaxian, all of this depends on being human. If you're going to run with Dwarven craftsmen and go and tap on the shoulder of your friend, the Dwarf King, and say, look, I need to borrow 100 dwarves for a few years, you may have a reduction in time, but an increase in costs. And that's something that you need to sort of factor into as well. Some things like elves, they don't really do construction well. They might do a tower because, wizards. But when it comes to actually building things, humans, half-orcs, gnomes, dwarves are definitely the place to go for some extra manpower, person power, demi-human power. Now, when they talk about something in here, it's worth mentioning, iron doors and such, they're not talking about the insides and the construction. We're talking about the base, broad strokes construction of the actual castle. Every castle generally has a couple of ways out. Not all of them are publicized, and they might be out via tunnels, which is not uncommon for many castles to have from the cellar a tunnel that leads out to somewhere, so that way everyone can escape. Secret doors in the back of somewhere to get everyone to get an immediate evacuation of the lord and family, and so on. So basically, this is not about minutiae. This is a very broad strokes build, which we'll have a look at in a second. Again, forgive me for my artwork, but what we have here is a rough idea of some basic construction for a castle. Very basic. 4 towers, some walls, the big keep, and a couple of other buildings as the main construct. A lot of buildings would have been up and down as needs must, and they would be made out of wood in structure, so that way they can be just replaced whenever they needed to. You'll have some that are fixtures, like you might have the servants' quarters, that have the kitchen and a few other things in one building, because you need to have that, and on the other building might be a chapel or a church or something like that, library, just some of that sort of thing, as well as whatever's going to be inside the main keep. So as a rough guide, 400 across, 300 by 300 is not an unreasonable, this is in feet, is not an unreasonable expectation for a reasonable castle, and that gives you enough space to be able to play with, and that's a nice sort of little home. And from a front view, that's sort of what I'm thinking. So you can see the main keep. So the main keep's going to be taller than what's recommended in the book, which means that it needs to either be thicker or it needs to have additional supporting structures. And I've gone with thicker walls, and it comes with that peaked roof and everything else. So you've got, instead of 2 floors and an attic, you've now got 4 floors and the attic, which takes it up to slightly over the height of the walls and towers. so visible from the front. It's a Barbican, so on. So, what does this all work out to be? Well, we've got 2 bastions, which are these protrusions-ish where the wall sort of curves out. Provide some extra defense along that side. The Barbican, the gatehouse, curtain walls. Now the curtain walls are in 100-foot lots. So for what I've chosen today, that's 12 sections. Merlins, so there's 10 per section. And then you've got parapets. "40-foot towers. The stone building that's going to be twice the normal height, as well as additional thickness for 5-foot walls. 2 stone buildings, so 2 stone buildings by 2, and 2 portcullises. So the portcullis for the gatehouse and for the Barbican. So we need 2 of those. So what does that all come to? 28,820 gold pieces. So we've got our working outs. Once you've broken it down into something a little bit more manageable, doing that whole break it down into a bite-sized piece and then work it from there, you can figure everything else out along the way. You don't need to actually map out the tower, the central keep. How that's configured is up and down, left and right. There's a lot of dollars in that. So basically that stone building is 1,500 gold pieces for the main keep. And that gets you that tall building that we're talking about, and we're good to go. So if you wanted to let the players figure out what they want roughly on each floor, that's fine. It's got X number of rooms and so on. That's all fine. It's not important to be able to get into that sort of specifics. Alright, so that's basically the castle. And how long does it take to build this? Well, this is this is probably a medium castle. You could, the small castle with outer and inner walls, or a medium castle. So basically 2 years plus 1 to 6 months. So for 2 years and 1 to 6 months, the player has to go find somewhere else to do things and probably find ways to get that money. And then after that time, the castle is all theirs to walk in with a turnkey, sort of. And then as soon as they do that, the next day up rocks a whole bunch of men-at-arms and we're good to go. If the player's shown an interest in wanting to go that way, build a keep and castle and everything else, they are going to need to find a way to settle down, which is the hard part. So that's when relationships here become important, because the player will become a fabric of the political landscape. As we said, if you're in Bissell, this might be an unruly section of the province, and the ruler might be like, yes, please, I need a buffer for the crazies in the mountains, because we know what's in the barrier peaks, right? And it keeps everyone else on their toes. So it's a good defensive spot here. They treat you nice, you treat them nice, and your player who lives here is a great point of defense. So once they've worked out where they want to be, and you might just have an arrangement like it. Again, I'm doing all this from a point of view of Greyhawk. A lot of where I run my games are out of this section here, because it's like the Wild West. And it's got nothing. So there's plenty of open space to put things in and to do things with the for the characters, because this kingdom hates this kingdom, and they made this kingdom to be the natural buffer. So this poor place right here is pulled pillar to post. You got one of the largest rivers in the land cutting you in half, and so on. So anyway, it's fun. I like this. This is not all of the games are always played out there, but my current one is. I often sometimes play it at the top here as well, or over here in the wilds down this end. But wherever you place your campaign, whatever you do with it, you might want to try and work out, if your players are the sorts that want to create these settlements, then you got to figure out what you're going to do. Look at this. Suspiciously, the Valley of the Mage is exactly what we were discussing. Suspiciously. What is handy to have on available is just a handful of little blueprints that as the DM you can already work from on what you think a castle looks like. So if you want your castle to be, so when the players say I want to build a castle, they may have an exact idea, and as long as they've got the funds they can pay for it. If they employ the architect engineer, they will want to just put forward what they want to put forward to make it easy for them, which is you making it easy for you as the DM. And that's not bad either. You can say, look, we've got a couple of these preset constructions, we know what to do, and we can work it out with an easy way of making something happen. So you put a couple of these together, and then you can just have a template of what the dollar value or the gold piece value is, and how much it can take up in terms of space. But sometimes they may just want to put up a keep, and only a keep. And there's plenty of instances where in history where someone has put up a keep, thinking I can always add the castle around it later, but history tells us that they never got around to that second part of the plan, which does happen. And so that's something as well. Just start with the main building and then build everything else once you've got it all sorted. Because you may have the 2,000 or 3,000 required to do a kick-ass keep, but the construction of the overall castle, that's something that you don't have. Especially if you've had to be paying for training for the last 8 levels. And again, the moment you have this, you no longer have to pay for training. So that's always a benefit to the players to think about that. And of course, the others get to hang out as well, make a bit of a clubhouse for the characters along the team party. So what we've been doing today is having a look at one of the best parts of being a fighter, and that is setting up a home. And with that, the others aren't able to do that in the same way. You can't just set up build castles in the same way when you're a paladin or a ranger. And the cleric creates a monastery or a large temple. The magic user basically builds a single tower. The thief has either a dwelling or a hideaway spot for the Thieves Guild. Assassins also have more of a hideaway spot in a secluded area. And the monk can build a monastery with no explanation on how that happens. So, but basically, as you progress, eventually comes a point where you're expected to lay down some roots, and then we can work it from there. But what hopefully I've done today is made it a little bit easier for the DMs out there to not be afraid of it and to embrace that this is something that's a good thing for the players want to do. It's them wanting to become a part of the fabric of the world that you've created, which is great. And all you can do is just hope that that carries through. So I'm going to finish it up here, and hopefully this is something that has been interesting somewhere. Like, subscribe, enjoy, and hopefully Yeah, if you like it all, and Patreon, of course, is available. But I'm just glad to be making these, and I'm very, very happy to get these out as often as possible. All right, so thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get another one of these out very soon. All right, have a good one. Stay safe, everybody.